be issued to the San Joaquin River Basin. We believe that we can coordinate with other water right districts and users to ensure that water right priorities are respected. And we urge the board to respect and support that as well. So thank you.
And Dave, I believe you're the last one up.
Good afternoon. My name is David Weisenberger. I'm the general manager of Banna Carbona Irrigation District on the San Joaquin River. We are a senior water right holder on the San Joaquin River with a pre-1914 right that dates back to August 1911 for a diversion of 200 CFS. BCID has been working cooperatively with Patterson Irrigation District and West Stanislaus and West Side Irrigation District on monitoring what's really happening on the San Joaquin at the lower end and what it comes into the delta at Vernalis and along the way. There are a number of inputs into the San Joaquin River that influence flows at our diversion point, including the Stanislaus River abandoned flows, irrigation return flows, wastewater treatment plant flows, various surface water and subsurface drains, and groundwater accretions. And, and also BCID is a signatory to also that letter of the senior water right holders on the San Joaquin River Basin requesting no curtailment notices be issued on the San Joaquin River. We believe that we can coordinate with other water districts and users to ensure that the water right priorities are respected. And in the manner in that we think this can be accomplished, and this goes to Mr. Howard's comment a couple of minutes ago about the San Joaquin River drying up, I don't see how that is possible if you recognize senior water rights holders, because not all the senior water rights holders are on the upper end. There's some on the tail end. So if a senior water right holder is on the bottom end and the river's dry, he's going to go upstream and look for that water. And he's going to make his complaint and find that water. So I don't see how, by following the water right system, the San Joaquin River will dry up, because some of those are in the South Delta. So that's to Mr. Howard's point. Now, over the years, Banna Carbona has been very active in protecting senior water rights. We have filed numerous protests to the post-1914 appropriation of water on the Merced, the Tuolumne, and the Stanislaus rivers, based on concerns that these upstream diversions to storage would adversely impact our pre-1914 senior water rights. In every instance, the State Water Board has told us that we didn't need to worry, that our senior water rights would be protected. In Decision 979, which authorized Merced Irrigation District diversion for the Bagby, Exchequer, and Snelling dams, the State Board did condition Merced ID's water right as BCID had requested, indicating BCID will likely be better off because it will be able to use fishery flows released from the Merced River. The board stated in D979, quote, with the operation of the proposed project by the Merced Irrigation District, it appears that the water supply of these protestants during the main irrigation season will be at least as good, if not better, than has been available in the past, and it is very probable that their overall water supply will be improved. Moreover, Merced ID will be subject to vested rights upon the district to respect such rights, permits issued, and it will be incumbent either by release of sufficient water of good quality to satisfy prior rights or by other appropriate means, end quote. And this is exactly what we are contemplating by the joint letter to the board by the senior water rights holders. Allow us, who work every day on the river, to coordinate to ensure the water right priorities are respected. We respectfully request that the State Water Board issue no curtailment notices on the San Joaquin River system.
Okay, we'll continue. We'll take a break a bit before 2, depending on where we are in speaker cards. I have 2 that are clipped together, Jeff Shields and Casey Hashimoto.
I didn't know we were together, but we'll take that way. I'm Jeff Shields, General Manager of South San Joaquin Irrigation District,
It's just
and a good friend of Casey's, so that works out just fine.
This is a shotgun marriage.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment today. And at the beginning, when the meeting was opened up, I think Chair Marcus indicated that there would be a curtailment order. We had asked maybe that you'd reconsider that, but absent that, I'm here to ask that you, at a minimum, employ option number 1 and give no consideration to the other options. SSJID is a senior water right holder on the Stanislaus River. Our water rights date to 1853, and those are adjudicated rights as well. Historic water right law exists to create order in times like this. That's really why we have the statutes to begin with. This notion that somehow, in someone's interpretation, that fairness needs to be injected into the system to trump those legacy ordering processes is just wrong. Implementing regulations that turn the legacy priority system on its head is unwise and likely is illegal. Emergency regs really are for the enforcement of unreasonable use and diversion. They're not intended for a means of water allocation. We've already got a statutory scheme for that. It's called the priority system. If that system can be set aside in the 3rd year of a drought, then it's no system at all. Adopting any method other than the current statutory scheme of priority to allocate scarce water without factual hearings of supply, demand, shortage, and impact is arbitrary and capricious. I want to focus for just a second on just one area of concern that I have in particular with the proposal before you, and that is agriculture in California is largely financed through co-op bank systems. Municipal water districts, irrigation districts are largely financed through the municipal debt markets. Water agencies and growers' creditworthiness are underpinned by the strength of our water rights. If the State Water Board sends a signal that they're willing to do anything other than follow strict adherence to the legacy order of priority, you're going to create a chilling effect on the ability of these agencies and these growers to finance their operations. Those are the kind of concerns that I had raised, and there was a publication in the Manteca Bulletin recently, a local newspaper, and to that article, Executive Director Howard sent a response. And it's one of the best that I've seen, and I appreciate that letter being sent to the Bulletin because, and I'll read just one quick line from it, the board is not overriding historic water rights. So I just came here to thank you for assuring that you're not going to override historic water rights by implementing anything other than option 1 if you find that even that's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to comment. My name is Casey Hashimoto, and I'm the General Manager of Turlock Irrigation District. I would like to provide 3 general and brief comments today. As you may be aware, TID was formed in 1887. We are the first irrigation district in the state. And TID has senior water rights as appropriators of the Tuolumne River. My first point, Turlock Irrigation District believes curtailment efforts should not be implemented hastily. It is acknowledged that California is operating in an emergency state, but solutions to this emergency must be born out of robust stakeholder involvement and a fact-based, procedurally driven process. Operating in an orderly manner is paramount. Point 2, TID believes that if curtailments are to be issued, they should be founded in water right priority. In this vein, TID believes that curtailment option 1, as defined in this workshop notice, would be the best tactic to move forward related to curtailment efforts, and is the only best tactic if limited to post-1914 water rights. Point 3, whether individually or as part of efforts of the San Joaquin Tributaries Authority, my staff has been working with state board staff on curtailment issues for the better part of the past 3 months. As such, TID staff will continue to assist state board staff during this process. My staff and modelers are working with historic district partners on the Tuolumne River to assist State Board staff to improve the existing curtailment analysis. This was indirectly referenced yesterday by Mr. O'Hagan's in his report to the board as part of item 6 of the agenda. And with that, Turlock Irrigation District thanks you for the opportunity to comment on this matter.
I have a question. So there's a lot of talk about real-time information and some of the shortcomings of the existing curtailment process with respect to real-time information. Have you had discussions with staff about how that could be improved with respect to the existing curtailment process?
Perhaps the SJTA has had those discussions. I know my staff has been involved in the information provided that the State Board staff is using to determine the curtailments. And so my modelers have been working to inform them of our actual water rights and how things actually work on the Tuolumne system. Tim would probably be able to explain the real-time data conversations with the State Board staff.
So it's more on use?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Kevin O'Brien? I'm sorry, Mariana.
Yeah,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interject. I think, as Jeannie was pointing out, there's some confusion about what any option is except for option 1. Because from the commenters, I hear a lot of emphasis on option 1 for reasons that are the same under option 1, option 2, and option 4. And so I just want to emphasize again for people here that you were maybe dozing off a little in the PowerPoint or had a big lunch and that was a long time ago, that option 1, option 2, and option 4 do not change any flow standards in the river or in the delta. They have nothing about outflow. Option 3 is the only option presented that has that. The major difference between options 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 is the data that we use. 3 and 4 use closer to real-time data, while 1 and 2 use reported data. And so I just wanted to take the time to emphasize that one more time, because we're getting such valuable input from people, and people have such specific knowledge about their systems and how their irrigation and their water rights work. But I think I'm not sure that the actual recommendations fit as well with what people are laying out as their concerns. So I just wanted to flag that again. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And I appreciate that, Mariana, but let's be totally clear here. There is a difference between option 1 and options 2 and 4, in that options 2 and 4 would place a higher priority on health and safety and other critical needs. And I think that's where most of the concern is coming from, that those needs, health and safety and other critical needs, may require curtailments from more senior water rights. So there is a difference between option 1, which everyone is advocating, and options 2 and 4.
If I could just clarify, options 2 and 4 would have the option to include the health and safety options that people had raised as a big concern in the drought hearings. Because, you know, we don't have a regulation in front of the board now that is dealing with the Delta watershed, and we have not yet adopted the proposed regulations, if we're going to, on the other watersheds that sort of lay out a potential method for the health and safety option. At this point in the game, that's not a decision that we'd have to make at this point between 1 and 2 and 4.
But it is a distinction between those options.
It could be, but we could also adopt a regulation that did not have that.
Ah,
And we could
Yeah.
also use option 1 and consider health and safety needs in our enforcement discretion, which I think is what we've started to do on the Scott River, is, you know, considering the needs of health and safety as well. So I don't think there's as clean a distinction between the options as people are perceiving.
I think it's important just to point out, to follow up, that the distinction as well is that, except for option 1, we're talking about emergency regulations for the remaining options, and I think that's in part what many of the commenters are raising as well.
But is that, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
is that, it would be helpful, I know people are only have 5 minutes, and so I always think it's perilous to try and assume what somebody means when they say certain things. And so, for example, as some people, sometimes there's going to be a difference in opinion about what water rights law is. So it would be sort of helpful for me if people could be as specific as possible when they're saying that they're worried we're going to violate the water rights priority system. So when people mean to say they're worried that we would violate the water rights priority system by inserting either a public health and safety exemption as mentioned here, or even through enforcement discretion, it would be more helpful to hear that specifically and a little bit why you think that's so. And at some point, obviously, I'd also ask staff why they think that might not be so. Just to be specific in terms of your comments so that we really do understand what your comments mean to say. And just going back, for example, when I said curtailments will happen, it's a question of how. It's because the numbers we have suggest that. I wasn't meaning to say preclude voluntary agreements that meet certain standards that we could say yes to, as some of the colloquy is. It's just the reason this is a workshop is because we knew this was very complicated and we wanted to hear from everybody. So the clearer and more precise you are, the more helpful that will be actually to us in trying to figure out what we actually want to craft. But we also know that there are also people, whether they stand up here today or say it, but have been saying it outside, that are eager for us to do curtailments because they have been planning on them or because they are senior in other places where they don't have an agreement. And so there's this real tension between trying to figure out how to navigate an extraordinary circumstance and moving quickly. And so we help us with dealing with that tension.
And there's no one better to do it
That's right.
than
No
Mr.
pressure.
Kevin
My
O'Brien.
timing is perfect. Kevin O'Brien here today for the Northern California Water Association and the entities listed on our letter. And Chair Marcus, that was a helpful exchange, and I'm going to come back to that issue specifically. But before I do that, in listening to the presentations this morning, it struck me that there's a certain disconnect going on in this discussion between the policy choices that are being considered by the board and the physical reality of the situation, particularly on the Sacramento River system. I heard your comments loud and clear this morning that one of the things you're wrestling with is how to protect stored water. You're concerned both about this year, in case we, quote, get the numbers wrong and we need water for fish. I think you're probably also concerned about next year in case we're in a dry year situation. And I also heard repeated references by the staff about the concern about illegal diverters. It's really important, I think, for the board to understand that much of what you're considering doing here is not going to result in any more water and storage on the Sacramento River system. And there's two reasons for that. I'm going to address one, which is more legal, and I'm going to ask Louis Baer, the manager of RD 108, to explain the other, which is more hydrological. On the legal side, if the board issues any of the proposed curtailment orders, and we also support one, and I'm going to come back to that, there are going to continue to be diversions
within the Sacramento River Basin by a whole host of water users who divert their water both under their water rights, but also under water rights settlement contracts. So if you look at, for example, irrigators within the North Delta Water Agency, those irrigators have a contract with the Department of Water Resources signed in 1981. They pay several $100,000 a year for that contract, and what that contract provides to them is an insurance policy, so that in a year like this, they get to use State Water Project supplies to backstop their water rights. You move upstream, the Sacramento River Settlement Contractors have contracts with the Bureau of Reclamation. First entered into in 1964, renewed in 2005. Those contractors pay money every year for so-called project water under those contracts, which provides them an insurance policy, so that in a year like this, notwithstanding curtailment notices which have come out before, they get to continue to divert, not under their own water rights, but under the CVP water rights. The Feather River contractors have the same mechanisms. And so this refrain about illegal diverters, at least with respect to the Sacramento River side, and I'm not going to address the San Joaquin, and the notion that by imposing these curtailments, you're going to suddenly have additional water that could be saved in storage in Shasta, I think is a very major misconception that's going on in this proceeding. And I think it's very important that you and your staff understand the physical realities of that situation. And I'm going to ask Mr. Bear to explain another aspect to this.
And can I ask that you come on up, but you haven't filled out a blue card, so we do need your blue card.
I brought my driver's license. So
No.
I'll
Well,
tell you who
just
I am. The whole works. So no problem. I will do that.
Thank
So
you.
my name is Louis Bear. I'm the general manager for Reclamation District 108, and we're a settlement contractor. First off, I want to emphasize that it seems like we always have good intentions. We just need to make sure they follow through and achieve the things that we want to achieve. You heard earlier that the settlement contractors delayed their diversions by about 3 weeks, a little shy of that. That moved about 150,000 acre feet back into a time when it can be used for temperature. I don't know if anybody's really expressed to you, that's about a 5 to 10% effect on yield for the rice growers in our district. It's not in our
I've
district,
been
but
telling
in the
your
valley.
story and using that number, so good.
Yeah. So I mean, that's about $100 million sacrifice for these guys. So this is a huge investment they made as part of the trade-off, and they're willing to do that. My concern is the discussion I heard earlier. I don't think Paul Fujitani should be up here telling most of this story, but I've spent the last 3 months with him in the spring, but I don't see him here. So the system somewhere between May 20th on the Sacramento River, between May 20th and June 1st, will be completely driven by temperature. So the diversions downstream of Lake Shasta will not change the releases that will be required from Shasta. And I think that's super important, because it really can help us adjust what our expectations are from a curtailment. And so I think it's important to think about that. If we completely stop diverting as settlement contractors anytime, I mean, it's really only about 2 weeks this year when, the 1.7 million acre feet of water that'll be used by settlement contractors actually driving releases from Shasta. So most of the time, almost all of the time, it's being driven by temperature. So if you release that water for temperature, if we go to zero, if we went up 3,000 CFS in our diversions, it wouldn't change how much water would be in Shasta at the end of the year. So I think when you heard National Marine Fisheries Service talking about, we need to make sure we protect fish, there was a trade-off made this year. We're protecting this year's fish, and that puts next year's fish at risk. But what we do for diversions, or subsequently what we do on a curtailment on the Sacramento River or in the Sacramento Valley, won't impact our carryover storage, or has very, very little chance of it impacting that. There is some chance that water released will allow reduction in release from Folsom or from Orville because there's more water in the system, but those systems are running very low as well this year, so I think that's a very small opportunity, a very, very small chance. So when looking at how much you shake things up with this type of decision, I think it's important to look at what we're going to get is results on the other side. So I think that's.
I have some questions. Oh,
Either one.
you're the chair. You go. Well, this is important information, and so I don't. I'd like to get the bottom of the disconnect, because I have been told that the reason that we need to consider something other than the sort of the normal curtailments, option one, the reason we may need to consider something like a term 91 is that if we don't have that protection, that additional water would have to be released in order to meet delta outflow. And you're saying something different, and that is that the system is being driven by releases to meet temperature requirements. So it's not going to make a difference. That's what's controlling.
Yeah, I think 100,000, I mean, I think if you talk to these same water right holders and you said we'd end up with 1 million acre feet addition in storage if you took these actions, it'd be a very different conversation. I think most of us think it's going to be a very small amount of water that ends up changing. What you may end up doing is really redistributing the water that's already released upstream. That's going to happen, and that's kind of, we're all concerned about that because it makes us all change things, but it doesn't allow us to back up very much water at all. So I specifically asked this question to Paul when he was leaving earlier, and Paul said that he thought there might be that small opportunity to back some of that Sacramento River water up into Folsom or Orville, but it's small. It's very small. It's not the 100,000 acre feet types of volumes. It's, you know, thousands.
And maybe we need to just hear from him on that, but some small opportunity based on what system? Did you have a conversation about, you mean if it's under option 3 or 4?
No, I mean,
You didn't talk about the different options.
Right, we didn't address the different options. I don't think they affect at least the Sacramento Valley significantly either way. So.
Okay.
Help me understand this, and staff can step in and help. A piece of it is, it's not to augment storage, or it could be, but it's to not over drain storage that's already been cut. I'm pointing to where they were sitting, sorry, Rich. Not over deplete it so we're left with too little at the end of the year. That's the more alarming. And then the issue is, if you're getting your contract deliveries, there's a distinction between folks who are getting their contract deliveries for stored water and other folks who may be relying just on water rights. If there's a complete overlap in the Sacramento Valley, I see some of the conundrum, but there can't be a total overlap. Maybe there is, and I just don't realize it. So can you help explain the relative impact? And I'll turn it to whoever you think would answer.
Just 2 quick comments, I guess. The first is that the speaker is correct that the drought operations plan proposed that Shasta would be operated just for temperature, and that once the water had met its temperature needs, and the releases have to be about 10,000 or so CFS, that water would then be available lower down for people to divert. And that is certainly the CVP's intent. I mean, that's what they are trying their best to operate to. That assumed a certain level of depletions, which may be met and may not be met. If those level of depletions are higher than are assumed, then they'll have to make more releases out of Oroville, they'll have to make more releases out of Folsom, and if push comes to shove, they would have to make more releases out of Shasta. They're doing everything possible to avoid releases from Shasta in order to maintain temperature control, but they're right at the ragged edge. So, you know, it is important, I think, that we try to ensure that all the depletions in the basin are lawful. Regarding Kevin O'Brien's comment that, well, we misunderstand because actually most of these guys have contracts. Actually, we understand that very, very well. We analyzed this to the nth degree in 2000 and figured out exactly what we thought would be the amount of water that would be available, assuming that we curtailed people who didn't have contracts and that they actually did curtail, and that, you know, their depletions didn't occur. Now, whether everyone will curtail and whether we'll have enough people to go out and check, but, and I don't recall off the top of my head, it wasn't a huge amount of water. My recollection is post-1914 appropriators, it was in the area of about 600,000 acre feet. because most of the people in the basin do have contracts. Now that, I don't believe we went to pre-1914s or riparians in doing that analysis. And that, I don't make me swear to the 600,000 acre feet. This was 2,000 after all. But we have, looked at this in excruciating detail, and we're very well aware of how the system will operate as curtailments occur.
Just so to put a point on it, what that means is that other than the contract water, there are 600,000 acre feet of post-14s.
Post-14s, as I recall, that don't have any contracts
That don't,
with
so
the
that's not,
department and
not,
Bureau. And again, I'm sorry, I don't, I'm saying that number because when I think about 2,000, that's the number that somehow pops into my head, but I can't guarantee it.
I think it's difficult to have these kind of operational, push in here and pops out there conversations, but what might be really helpful for the board is to look at that and try to quantify what the yield is of this decision, so that you guys know that, likely it might result in 10,000 acre feet or 100,000 acre feet, at least an area of order of magnitude, because it seems to me like that could affect.
of avoided depletion.
Right.
It's not of addition, it's of avoided depletion, so.
Well, and it's not just avoided depletion, because I think that's the important point I wanted to make, is you got to run that through the operational filter and see what that really does, because if it moves water from this contractor to that contractor, is that as important as if it ends up behind Shasta at the end of the year, which is, certainly valuable, so. Anyway.
Right, and how it relates to the temperature releases.
Thank you.
I just want to add on that last point, I'd like to understand the analysis of the 600,000 acre feet. I've been practicing in the Sacramento Valley for almost 30 years, and I would be extremely surprised if there's 600,000 acre feet that would actually show up as a result of a curtailment. So that's a fair subject for discussion and debate, and I hope that Mr. Howard and I can take a closer look at that number and perhaps come back to the board at some point and discuss that. But I hope that number doesn't take on a life of its own, as numbers sometimes do. Quickly on options, we do support option one. Option one is essentially the process that's been used historically. I think there's 6 or 7 years are listed in my letter where that's what the board has done. One point I wanted to make is that you could combine option one with this real-time concept that Board Member Adamo has raised a couple times. There's nothing magical about doing it exactly the same way it's historically been done, and if there's a way to do it using real-time numbers, I certainly think that's probably preferable. Whether we have those numbers in sufficient detail to do that this year, I don't know. That's a question for your staff, but we would not have a problem with that. I think the concern we have with options 2, 3, and 4, the principal concern is the regulation aspect. And I'm not going to make a long legal argument here, but there is a lot of discussion in the case law about how you go about curtailing water rights. And I did just want to read a quote from the Racanelli decision, the United States versus State Water Resource Control Board from back in the 80s, I think it was 86. And this has been quoted in other cases. It says, in undertaking to allocate water rights, the board performs an adjudicatory function. And to a water lawyer, what that means is before you start curtailing people from their water diversions, you need to have an evidentiary process, not a legislative process like we've had today. I don't personally think at the end of the day there's enough benefit that will come to the system, to the state of California, to the environment, to water users that would justify going through the kind of evidentiary process I think you would have to go through this year to get to those types of decisions. That's sort of our bottom line issue. And then just quickly on option 3, the problem with option 3 really is that it gets into the same set of issues that this very same board may have to get into at some point with respect to allocation of responsibility to meet Bay Delta water quality objectives. That's a very big issue. We avoided it back in 2000 with the Phase 8 settlement. It's coming around again. Whether we can come up with a settlement this time, who knows? That may ultimately take multiple months of hearings before this board, but to try to do it in the context of a regulation, I think would be both unwise and unlawful. And so we very strongly oppose that.
I just have a question, and maybe I'm not remembering this right, but isn't part of the benefit of the emergency regulations the enhanced enforcement penalties that the legislature specifically gave us to make whatever we do during the drought more effective? Or is that separate? Do we have that authority without emergency regulations?
That's right. The emergency legislation did give the board enhanced ability to enforce violations of the regulation. So it would be more enforceable.
Right. So we don't get those penalties under the option 1.
Right.
Or we do under option 1.
No, under option 1, the board would have to rely on its existing enforcement authority,
going
which
to court and all
is
that.
fairly limited.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we take a break?
Yeah.
We will take a break. We will, I believe, resume. I'm sorry. Yes.
Is there any way I can give my comments now? Because I have a commitment later if I stick to 5 minutes. I think I'm next on the list. I was right after Kevin on the cards.
You are next on the list. Can you do it in 3?
I'll be really fast. I'll do
Okay.
it in 3, and you can tell me to stop.
And next time you might want to get a paperclip.
I'm Alan Lilly, and I represent the Yuba County Water Agency. And first of all, I did want to just note that starting back in April, there were proposed curtailment processes specific to the Yuba River. I think Mr. Howard has told me and is basically committed that that's not going to happen anymore. We sent in detailed comments that basically there were a lot of double counting of the analysis, and also that it's really not necessary. Mr. Howard has said the two reasons for the regulations are to protect senior water right holders and for in-stream values. And on the Yuba River, the senior water right holders downstream have water right settlement contracts with the Yuba County Water Agency. They will be fully protected. And also the water will be there because we have to meet the in-stream flows. And that gets to the second point. The fish will be fully protected in the lower Yuba River because, as all of you know, this board approved the order implementing the lower Yuba River Accord back in 2000, whenever it was, 8 or 9, I think. Therefore, there's going to be plenty of flows for the hydrologic conditions for protecting the fisheries. So please don't go back to any separate order on the Yuba River. It was the only watershed in the Sacramento Valley that was singled out for a separate consideration, and it's not necessary. Regarding the Bay Delta, and particularly the Sacramento River side of the Bay Delta, please, whichever option you decide to go forward, limit it to the post-1914 rights. There's an unbelievable legal can of worms if you start trying to curtail pre-14s and riparians. Getting down to begin with as to what the priorities are, the statements just have, for pre-14s, they just have year of first use, and under penalty of perjury or not, what somebody's guessing about when a use started more than 100 years ago may or may not be accurate at all. There also are legal questions. Normally riparian rights are senior to appropriatives, but not always, depending on when the land went from public domain into private ownership. And there's a real question of curtailing pre-14s or riparians for public trust benefits. There's no legal authority to do that in either statutes or case law, and that would definitely be plowing very new ground for the board to do that. And then finally, there's a question of whether it would be reasonable to curtail upstream appropriative diversions to try to improve salinity conditions in the delta for riparians. There's a real question of whether that would be a waste and unreasonable use of water. So my pitch is no separate Yuba River order, and please limit any order, whether it's option 1, 2, or 4, and we certainly agree with all of Kevin's comments and prefer option 1, but any of them should be limited to post-14 rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we will take a break for 10 minutes, and we'll resume on item 12, I think. Do we have the fish folks? Okay, yes. We will resume on item 12 after the break. I even have a
Yes.